Chapter 3, Requiescant by Victor Hugo from the book Les Misérables. Madame de T.'s salon was all that Marius Pontmercy knew of the world. It was the only opening through which he could get a glimpse of life. This opening was sombre, and more cold than warmth, more night than day, came to him through this skylight. This child, who had been all joy and light on entering this strange world, soon became melancholy, and what is still more contrary to his age, grave. Surrounded by all those singular and imposing personages, he gazed about him with serious amazement. Everything conspired to increase this astonishment in him. There were in Madame de T.'s salon some very noble ladies named Mathan ne Lavis, which was pronounced Lavy, Cambis pronounced Cambyse. These antique visages and these biblical names mingled in the child's mind with the Old Testament which he was learning by heart, and when they were all there, seated in a circle around a dying fire, sparely lighted by a lamp shaded with green, with their severe profiles, their grey or white hair, their long gowns of another age, whose lugubrious colours could not be distinguished, dropping at rare intervals, words which were both majestic and severe, little Marius stared at them with frightened eyes, in the conviction that he beheld not women but patriarchs and magi, not real beings but phantoms. The bailiff de Ferret, with his short breeches and his thin legs, sometimes traversed this salon on his way to M. de Talleyrand. He had been M. le Comte d'Artois, companion in pleasures, and unlike Aristotle crouching under Campaspe, he had made the Guimard crawl on all fours, and in that way he had exhibited to the ages a philosopher avenged by a bailiff. As for the priests, there was the Abbé Halma, the same to whom M. de Roquelaure was notable for his lofty figure and his assiduity at the academy. Through the glass door of the neighbouring hall of the library where the French Academy then held its meetings, the curious could, on every Tuesday, contemplate the ex-bishop of Senlis, usually standing erect, freshly powdered in violet hose, with his back turned to the door, apparently for the purpose of allowing a better view of his little collar. There lay the essence and quintessence of the Parisian white society. Their reputations, even royalist reputations, were held in quarantine. The noble salons of the present day no longer resemble those salons. The Faubourg Saint-Germain reeks of the faggot even now. The royalists of today are demagogues, let us record it to their credit. At Madame de T.'s the society was superior, taste was exquisite and haughty, under the cover of a great show of politeness. Manners there admitted of all sorts of involuntary refinements which were the old regime itself, buried but still alive. Some of these habits, especially in the matter of language, seem eccentric. Persons but superficially acquainted with them would have taken for provincial that which was only antique. A woman was called Madame la Générale. Madame la Colonelle was not entirely disused. The charming Madame de Léon, in memory, no doubt, of the Duchesses de Longueville and de Chevreuse, preferred this appellation to her title of princess. The Marquise de Créquy was also called Madame la Colonelle. It was this little high society which invented at the Tuileries the refinement of speaking to the king in private as the king in the third person, and never as your majesty, the designation of your majesty having been soiled by the usurper. Men and deeds were brought to judgment there. They jeered at the age which released them from the necessity of understanding it. They abetted each other in amazement. They communicated to each other that modicum of light which they possessed. Methuselah bestowed information on Epimenides. The deaf man made the blind man acquainted with the course of things. They declared that the time which had elapsed since Coblentz had not existed. In the same manner that Louis Roman XVIII was by the grace of God, in the 25th year of his reign, the emigrants were, by rights, in the 25th year of their adolescence. All was harmonious, nothing was too much alive, speech hardly amounted to a breath, the newspapers agreeing with the salons seemed a papyrus. There were some young people, but they were rather dead. The liveries in the antechamber were antiquated. These utterly obsolete personages were served by domestics of the same stamp. They all had the air of having lived a long time ago, and of obstinately resisting the sepulchre. Nearly the whole dictionary consisted of conserva, conservation, conservator, to be in good odour. That was the point. There are in fact aromatics in the opinions of these venerable groups, and their ideas smelled of it. It was a mummified society. The masters were embalmed, the servants were stuffed with straw. A worthy old marquise, an émigré and ruined, who had but a solitary maid, continued to say, "My people." What did they do in Madame de T.'s salon? They were ultra. To be ultra, this word, although what it represents may not have disappeared, has no longer any meaning at the present day. Let us explain it. To be ultra is to go beyond, it is to attack the scepter in the name of the throne, and the mitre in the name of the altar. It is to ill-treat the thing which one is dragging, it is to kick over the traces. It is to cavil at the faggot on the score of the amount of cooking received by heretics. It is to reproach the idol with its small amount of idolatry. It is to insult through excess of respect. It is to discover that the Pope is not sufficiently papish, that the king is not sufficiently royal, and that the night has too much light. It is to be discontented with alabaster, with snow, with the swan and the lily in the name of whiteness. It is to be a partisan of things to the point of becoming their enemy. It is to be so strongly for as to be against. The ultra spirit especially characterizes the first phase of the Restoration. Nothing in history resembles that quarter of an hour which begins in 1814 and terminates about 1820, with the advent of M. de Villèle, the practical man of the right. These 6 years were an extraordinary moment, at one and the same time brilliant and gloomy, smiling and sombre, illuminated as by the radiance of dawn and entirely covered, at the same time, with the shadows of the great catastrophes which still filled the horizon and were slowly sinking into the past. There existed in that light and that shadow a complete little new and old world, comic and sad, juvenile and senile, which was rubbing its eyes. Nothing resembles an awakening like a return, a group which regarded France with ill temper, and which France regarded with irony. Good old owls of marquises by the streetful, who had returned, and of ghosts, the former subjects of amazement at everything, brave and noble gentlemen who smiled at being in France but wept also, delighted to behold their country once more, in despair at not finding their monarchy. The nobility of the Crusades treating the nobility of the Empire, that is to say, the nobility of the sword, with scorn. Historic races who had lost the sense of history. The sons of the companions of Charlemagne disdaining the companions of Napoleon. The swords, as we have just remarked, returned the insult. The sword of Fontenoy was laughable and nothing but a scrap of rusty iron. The sword of Marengo was odious and was only a sabre. Former days did not recognize yesterday. People no longer had the feeling for what was grand. There was someone who called Bonaparte Scapin. This society no longer exists. Nothing of it, we repeat, exists today. When we select from it some one figure at random, and attempt to make it live again in thought, it seems as strange to us as the world before the deluge. It is because it, too, as a matter of fact, has been engulfed in a deluge. It has disappeared beneath 2 revolutions. What billows are ideas! How quickly they cover all that it is their mission to destroy and to bury, and how promptly they create frightful gulfs. Such was the physiognomy of the salons of those distant and candid times, when M. Martinville had more wit than Voltaire. These salons had a literature and politics of their own. They believed in five. M. Agier laid down the law in them. They commentated M. Colnett, the old bookseller and publicist of the Quai Malaquais. Napoleon was to them thoroughly the Corsican ogre. Later, on the introduction into history of M. le Marquis de Bonaparte, Lieutenant General of the King's armies, was a concession to the spirit of the age. These salons did not long preserve their purity. Beginning with 1818, doctrinarians began to spring up in them, a disturbing shade. Their way was to be royalists and to excuse themselves for being so. Where the ultras were very proud, the doctrinarians were rather ashamed. They had wit, they had silence, their political dogma was suitably impregnated with arrogance, they should have succeeded. They indulged, and usefully too, in excesses in the matter of white neckties and tightly buttoned coats. The mistake or the misfortune of the doctrinarian party was to create aged youth. They assumed the poses of wise men. They dreamed of engrafting a temperate power on the absolute and excessive principle. They opposed, and sometimes with rare intelligence, conservative liberalism to the liberalism which demolishes. They were heard to say, "Thanks for royalism." It has rendered more than one service. It has brought back tradition, worship, religion, respect. It is faithful, brave, chivalric, loving, devoted. It has mingled, though with regret, the secular grandeurs of the monarchy with the new grandeurs of the nation. Its mistake is not to understand the revolution, the empire, glory, liberty, young ideas, young generations, the age. But this mistake which it makes with regard to us, have we not sometimes been guilty of it towards them? The revolution whose heirs we are ought to be intelligent on all points. To attack royalism is a misconstruction of liberalism. What an error, and what blindness! Revolutionary France is wanting in respect towards historic France, that is to say, towards its mother, that is to say, towards itself. After the 5th of September, the nobility of the monarchy is treated as the nobility of the empire was treated after the 5th of July. They were unjust to the eagle, we are unjust to the fleur-de-lis. It seems that we must always have something to proscribe. Does it serve any purpose to ungild the crown of Louis XIV, to scrape the coat of arms of Henry IV? We scoff at M. de Vaublanc for erasing the N's from the bridge of Jena. What was it that he did? What are we doing? Bouvines belongs to us as well as Marengo. The fleurs de lis are ours as well as the N's. That is our patrimony. To what purpose shall we diminish it? We must not deny our country in the past any more than in the present. Why not accept the whole of history? Why not love the whole of France? It is thus that doctrinarians criticized and protected royalism, which was displeased at criticism and furious at protection. The ultras marked the first epoch of royalism, congregation characterized the second. Skill follows ardor. Let us confine ourselves here to this sketch. In the course of this narrative, the author of this book has encountered in his path this curious moment of contemporary history. He has been forced to cast a passing glance upon it, and to trace once more some of the singular features of this society which is unknown today, but he does it rapidly and without any bitter or derisive idea. Souvenirs both respectful and affectionate, for they touch his mother, attach him to this past. Moreover, let us remark, this same petty world had a grandeur of its own. One may smile at it, but one can neither despise nor hate it. It was the France of former days. Marius Pontmercy pursued some studies, as all children do. When he emerged from the hands of Aunt Gillenormand, his grandfather confided him to a worthy professor of the most purely classic innocence. This young soul, which was expanding, passed from a prude to a vulgar pedant. Marius went through his years of college, then he entered the law school. He was a royalist, fanatical and severe. He did not love his grandfather much, as the latter's gaiety and cynicism repelled him, and his feelings towards his father were gloomy. He was, on the whole, a cold and ardent, noble, generous, proud, religious, enthusiastic lad, dignified to harshness, pure to shyness.